All right. This is week 9, I believe, of the the lecture now, the semester. Um, and this video is meant to be viewed in association with Monday, October. Let's see. I think it'll be October 12th, because today is the 10th, and that's 2 days hence. So, before I delve into the substance of what I would like to talk about today and continue our discussion of Cyrus and talk a little bit more about Persia and then eventually, hopefully, talk about Greece and the wars between Greece and Persia. I can only aspire to get that far. Before I get into all that, though, I want to make some quick perfunctory remarks concerning the reason as to why you're watching this video right now and that you're not sitting in room 103, the chemistry classroom of Gogaba Community College's Copper Country Center. Now, you should have received an email by now, and if you haven't, I admonish you to go back and check your email and ensure that you are actually receiving communications from me properly and effectively. I sent out an email yesterday, which would have been Friday, and in that message, I explained several things. I said, first of all, that I had made the decision to continue to rely upon the online mode of instruction and the YouTube delivery system that we've been utilizing so effectively and efficiently for the last couple of weeks now. And I did that for several reasons. The preeminent reason in my mind, and really the one that supersedes all the others, is that my parents, both of whom are in their late 70s, have temporarily relocated to the house that I was previously living in, off of Kearsarge Street in Lorium, which is just up by Calumet. Now, I'm not going to say that that categorically precludes me from coming back there, but it offers me considerable disincentive to return. And the reason, if it's not self evident, will become so if, in fact, you avail yourself of the most recent epidemiological data for Houghton County and the surrounding counties in the Upper Peninsula. You will find, and you are probably all very conspicuously aware of the fact that the situation up there from an epidemic standpoint is very, very bad. And I did not say what I said in the email to intimidate or frighten or terrify or imbue any of you with any undue anxiety or trepidation. That was not my intention, and hopefully that's not what the effect of that was. Nor is it my hope here or intention here to terrify any of you concerning the prospects of potentially contracting COVID yourself. But what I'm saying, I suppose, is that if you were to ask yourself, if hypothetically you were in Jeff's position, and discount the fact that I'm living in this lavish and ostentatious home in Bloomfield Hills. Discount that. Really, honestly, that doesn't factor into my calculus. Or if it does, it's a secondary variable. It's a very minor consideration. Contemplate the decision that I'm faced with. All right, and the reason I'm saying all this is because I really genuinely, truly want you guys to understand and appreciate where I'm coming from when I made this decision. And I don't want anybody to think that, oh, well, it's just a matter of him just wanting to be down there in Detroit because his girlfriend is down there and he likes to hang out with his homies and he likes to play Xbox in the basement because he's got a big movie theater down there and this, that, and the other thing. Don't ascribe my reasoning, my rationale, my motivation to those rather spurious motives, because that's not what impelled me and that's not what really weighed heavily on my mind when I made this decision. So if you read that email, you will have seen that the real reason is because I was very concerned and still am very concerned about the possibility of infecting my parents with COVID, unwittingly so, right? Because we know that about 25% of the cases of COVID are asymptomatic, which means that you have COVID, you're incubating the virus, you're conceivably spreading it to other people, depending on how much viral shedding is going on, depending on just how infectious you happen to be at any given time and what you're doing, whether you're wearing a mask, whether you're in close proximity to others, et cetera, et cetera. But you are, in fact, incubating the virus. And if you're incubating the virus, then you are conceivably infectious, and you could, in fact, cause other people to contract the virus. Now, again, we know that 25% of the people that contract this virus are, in fact, asymptomatic. They don't exhibit any outward manifestation of symptoms. And we also know from the data that there are approximately 800 people now in Houghton County that are infected with COVID as of today, which is Saturday, October 10th. Now, just do the extrapolation on that, right? That means that there's anywhere between 250 and 300 people, closer to 300 now. Well, no, between 250 and 300 people that are running around in Houghton, we have to assume, in Hancock and Calumet and Warren and all the other ancillary places around there, that are in fact infected, but they don't know that. And they may very well be unwittingly transmitting this and spreading it to other people because they don't know, and they can't know because there's no way for them to ascertain that unless they actually went out there and got a test, and they wouldn't have the incipient motivation to do that unless they suspected they had COVID. But you wouldn't suspect you have COVID unless in fact you're exhibiting any symptoms. So if you're not exhibiting symptoms, you wouldn't have the motivation to go get tested, and therefore you wouldn't know whether or not you actually had COVID dispositively, definitively. And therefore, I submit to you that it is a unwarrantable, unmeritable danger and hazard and risk to expose not so much myself, right? I'm not so much concerned about myself, but I'm rather concerned about the possibility of going to class and not necessarily contracting it from one of you, because there are other things that you do when you live in the community, not just go to class, and there's other things that you do in association with going to class, and all of you are going to have to do those things. But I'm exempting you from that. And I don't want anybody to think that they're indebted to me because, oh, I'm just doing you all a favor, and that's the real reason as to why I'm deciding to conduct class online or continuation of this class online. I just so happen to think that it seems to me to be the case, anyways, that you guys do actually accrue a substantial benefit from this, a tangible and cognizable benefit from the fact that we are going to continue to conduct this lecture in the form that it is presently taking. It seems to me that you would not actually want to necessarily go to class, not only if it is the fact with any of you, I don't know whether or not that's true, that you have an aversion for getting up early. Of course, that's a fairly compelling reason in and of itself, but think of what else you have to do, right? You have to get in your car. You have to get up early, right? You have to drive your car. You have to expend gas to get from A to B, right? Get from wherever it is you're coming from to wherever, well, to wherever it is you're going, which is classroom number 103, right? That takes time. That costs money, right? You're going to expose yourself to the possibility of the pathogen because you're going to expose yourself to an environment where there are other people in close proximity to you. Hopefully, they will all be wearing masks and assiduously adhering to pandemic protocols, but you don't know that. You can't control for that. So there are a lot of things that I think are, with respects to the transition to, or the continuation, I shouldn't say transition because that implies long term. But there are many things, I think many factors that are very probative, that are very relevant for your purposes anyways, that seem to me to suggest that this should be looked at and construed as something that's advantageous, that you would reap a benefit from this. I'm not saying that it's exclusively, it's all good, right? It's just all, this positive gain, right? Maybe for some of you, you actually prefer being in class in person, seeing me directly interfacing with me interpersonally. I don't think that's a big issue, though, with this class. And I don't think it's a big issue with any class that I teach because, quite frankly, and this is not to denigrate any of you, you guys don't really ask questions, okay? And that's fine. That's fine. Because it suggests to my mind that you don't have any questions to ask. It means that I'm doing a very effective job at communicating and articulating this stuff, and that you're doing a very good job at assimilating the information, so that, therefore, nothing requires clarification because there is no confusion or consternation. That's what I have to assume, okay? So if there are no questions, then that is not a consideration, right? It's not like, oh, I'm depriving you, I'm dispossessing you of the ability to actually interface with me and directly ask me questions and go back and forth vis-a-vis me and you. That doesn't even enter the calculus, right? I've had maybe a couple of people ask me questions so far this term, and we're 9 weeks into the term. 6 of those weeks were conducted in class, interpersonally, and several questions in the course of that entire swath of time. Seems to me to be the case that there's not many questions that are being asked, not many questions that are being incubated in the minds of the people who are attending this class. Fine, okay, I don't have a problem with that, neither should you. It's not a problem, it's a good thing, right, as far as I'm concerned. Now, the other thing, and this is a very important reason. I mean, this is the most salient reason that I can think of, anyways. When it comes to the various rationales that I can marshal and use as, I'm not trying to some ex post facto justification of my decision, because it's not enough to say that I would not be able to live with myself if in fact I were to go back up there and then conceivably unwittingly transmit COVID to either one of my parents, and then they would suffer the consequences and conceivably die. That I wouldn't be able to live with myself if in fact that were to play out, right? I mean, that should be enough in and of itself, right? My dad is I don't know if I want to go on record and say all this, but he's got asthma. He's 76 years old. He uses a cane because he's got mobility impairment issues since he fractured his hip and he had a hip replacement 2 years ago. He's in a relatively frail condition, and as such, he would be much more susceptible to a much more grievous form of COVID if in fact he were to contract that. And again, I cannot be the cause of that. All right, I will not be the cause of that. And the only way that I can categorically guarantee that I will not be the cause of that is by refraining from having any physical interpersonal contact with them across the board. Okay, and the only way I can do that is to continue to do this. Now, you may say, well, that's kind of selfish of you, Jeff. And I would say, well, in a way it's selfish. I mean, I'm thinking about my parents and that they are my parents. They're not your parents. So I suppose that that's a self-orientated sort of calculus. But I don't think it's selfish per se. I mean, I'm not, if I were to say that I'm just making this all up, right, and this has nothing to do with my parents, and in actuality, I just like spending time with my girlfriend and hanging out down here and seeing my homies and playing Xbox, and this is a farcical, phantasmagorical scheme that I'm just plotting and making up as I'm going along. Well, of course, that would be entirely disingenuous and mendacious of me. But that's not the case, right? I mean, you can go and check yourself, right? You can see the house on. Well, I'm not going to give you the address because maybe you will go there and then infect my parents with COVID, and then it would defeat the whole point. But look, I'll close escrow on this by just saying this. I think that this situation makes sense for me ethically, because for me to do elsewise, for me to do otherwise, would be unconscionable. Okay, unconscionable ethically, unconscionable morally, and personally, manifestation of egregious personal irresponsibility. And I'm not an irresponsible person, and I don't have callous disregard for the well-being and the health of other people, especially not my parents. So hopefully this doesn't sound like a very long-winded excuse, right? Because it's not meant to be that. It's meant to be an explanation, and a fairly systematic accounting for an explanation of my rationale as to why I made the decision in the way that I did. And I trust you guys. I believe that it's incumbent upon me to be as forthcoming with you and as honest and transparent with respects to my decision-making process as I can be. Ergo, I'm expounding on this to the extent that I am. Now, the final point that I would make, again, and I will close escrow on this momentarily, and we will move on to the slides very shortly, is this. I think that it is maximally advantageous, maximally conducive to your purposes for achieving academic success in the context of this class, for us to continue to maintain this particular mode of instruction. I don't want to say indeterminately or indefinitely, because that's not in fact the case. That would be a misrepresentation. And again, this is going to be contingent on the assumption that my parents will be vacating the premises of the house that I would otherwise be domiciled at in the next 2 weeks. So that would bring us conceivably, that would bring me rather, back to you in 2 weeks' time, right? We're so roughly around the end of October, the 24th or 25th of October, whatever that's going to be, the latter stages of October. That's when I'm planning on coming back, okay? But as I was saying, all right, I think that it behooves all of you to hope, anyways. I mean, I don't want to say that you hope for COVID to be so bad in Houghton County that the Western Upper Peninsula Health Department is going to come to Michigan Tech and Finlandia and go back and say, you guys got to shut down and revert back to online instructions again. But I think that for many of you, this actually is optimized, this modality of instruction is optimized for your success. Think about it this way. You can watch these lectures whenever it may be convenient for you. Okay, whenever it's convenient for you, you just do whatever you, and not only that, right, so you have the flexibility in terms of the time, right? You don't have to be at a particular place at a particular time for an extended period of time contiguously until such time as I give you a break. You interface with this to the extent that you want to, and when you are able to, and when it is convenient for you, okay? So that's point number one. Point number two, again, going back to what I said before, is that I'm not mandating that you get up early. I'm not saying, hey, we're going to do this via Zoom, right, or Skype, right, and you got to be there in the flesh, so to speak, and we're just going to do it virtually, but we're going to be adhering scrupulously to the schedule. I'm not doing that, right? And again, I'm doing that out of consideration for you as well as out of consideration for me, okay? Because again, I don't want to be disingenuous by saying that it's entirely out of consideration for you, so it's not. But, and then the third point, and I think that this is probably the most pressing point, the one that should resonate most strongly, hopefully, with all of you, is that the exams that are going to be contingent upon an online mode of instruction are necessarily, ipso facto, in and of themselves, going to necessarily have to be easier by definition. And what I mean by that is contrast the physical, traditional, conventional exam with the unconventional online learning modality exam that's going to be associated with this particular type of instruction, right? So a physical traditional exam, you come to class, right? You don't have any notes, okay? You have to conform your answers to a particular space, right? And the space is limited because I only have so many pieces of paper that I can print off at any given time, right? So you have to conform your answers to a particular space, that there are physical constraints in terms of the extensiveness of your answer. That's consideration number one. The time constraint is there, okay? So you only have the extent of the time that we have allocated towards this class. So you don't have unlimited time to take the test, right? Again, this is the conventional, traditional, old school way of taking a test. And then finally, you don't have access to any ancillary materials while you're taking the test. You don't have your notes. You don't have the book. Not that that would matter. You don't have the lecture slides. You don't have anything, okay? You have yourself and your mind and your memory and whatever facts and topics and themes and abstractions that you can call to mind and recapitulate in the context of that test while you're taking it at that time, right? That's what you have, okay? And those are the tools in your toolbox, proverbially speaking, right? Now, what do you have? Conversely, what do you have when you're taking an online, quote, take-home test, okay? Well, you have not unlimited time, but virtually unlimited time. I give you guys, I think, at least 7 or 8 days heads up, or time notice as to when the exam will be due, right? So you have at least 7 days. You have the study guide at your disposal. You can utilize that contemporaneous or simultaneous with the answering the questions, right? You don't have any physical restrictions in terms of the extensiveness of your answer. You can make your answer as long or as short as you want, right? Because you can just amend that Word document, that template that I send out, and then send it back to me via PDF or send it back to me hopefully via a Word document, right? But you're not constrained to a particular space on a piece of paper, right? And furthermore, again, you don't have the time constraints, right? So take as long as you want. Be leisurely in your approach. Luxuriate, if you will, as they would say down south. Like luxuriate as you're taking the test. And then finally, again, you have all the resources that you can bring to bear in your efforts to comprehend what the question is asking and provide me with a lucid and intelligible and comprehensive response. You can bring the PowerPoint slide. You can have those available. You can have this lecture, indeed, right? You can have this lecture available, and you can be listening to this contemporaneous with your responding to the questions on the test. I don't see that as being particularly onerous. I don't see that as being particularly counterproductive in terms of undermining your efforts to achieve maximum academic success. In fact, I think that that's precisely conducive to a paradigm whereby the situation does in fact lend itself to maximizing your potential for academic success, right? That's my personal take, okay? And going back to what I said in the email, and I will reiterate this one point, and then I will cease and desist, and we will move on to the lecture. But the final point is this: if I were you, if I were a student in my own class, I would seriously and genuinely and strenuously hope and pray, if you're a praying person, that this particular mode of instruction continues indefinitely or for as long as is possible. Because I genuinely think that if in fact that is to be the case, that I will see an appreciable difference in the cumulative grade point average of the students in this class, right? If we continue to use this particular mode of instruction, contrasted with if in fact we were to revert back to the traditional mode. All right, I really do think that you guys are optimally situated to maximize your academic success potential with respects to the way in which we're conducting business as it is right now, as it stands. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you guys updates via email with respects to what we're planning on doing, and I will say this again. I said this before in the email, but I'll say it again because it's important for you to hear. If you have any genuine concerns regarding our transition to this unconventional mode of instruction, which by now it's not unconventional because I've used this almost as often as I've used the physical going to class now. Because this is I think this is week 2 of or this is actually week 3, all right? Because there's an additional week on top of the 2-week hiatus, and then there were the original first week of the semester when I was still down here in Detroit. But if you have any existential problems with this particular mode of instruction, I really do strenuously urge and encourage you to reach out and contact me, and let me know, right? Tell me, hey Jeff, here's the reasons why, X, Y, and Z. Here are the reasons why I don't think this is really as good as you make it out to be, for me particularly, right? And if that is in fact the case, and if you're somebody who doesn't really engage well with this particular mode of instruction, that's fine. All right, I don't begrudge you that. I'm not going to denigrate you because of that. I understand different people learn different ways. I understand that everybody's individualized and has their own unique proclivities and such. I get that, right? But the point is, if this is a problem, it is incumbent upon you to proactively and preemptively remediate that problem. Come to me so that you and I can formulate a success strategy to redress whatever issues may otherwise impede your success utilizing this form of instruction. All right, it's your responsibility to advise and apprise me of the fact that this is something that you have a fundamental incompatibility with. It's incongruous to your learning interests somehow, some way. I don't know. Right, so help me help you. All right, that is the final point that I'm going to make. Now we're going to turn to the slides. Okay, so I got to get my seating area here set up here, so I don't have to stand up here the whole time. All right, so if you guys remember where I left off last time, I was talking about Cyrus the Great, and I was talking about the origins story, if you will, right? There's the Wolverine origins movie with Hugh Jackman and some other people. Well, this is Cyrus the Great origins, right? And we talked about how the origins trace the narrative, anyways, the narrative structure of the origin story, because there's a lot going on, right? And the reason I call it a narrative structure is because it's like a piece of theater, right? It's like a piece of historical theater. It's very theatrical. It's very melodramatic, right? There's all this business about the babies being switched at birth, right? With the stillborn and the fake Cyrus, right? And then there's the bodyguard that goes out there and he's supposed to assassinate the young Cyrus. And then there's the mother of Cyrus, the daughter of Astyages, the old king, right? He has this dream of his daughter, and it's this very prophetic dream, and there's all sorts of things, all these sorts of ridiculous and fantastical things going on in the background. I mean, this is the backdrop, if you will, of the origins, the beginnings of Cyrus the Great. Now, of course, much of this, I don't want to say all of it because I can't say that, well, you know, if I said all of it, then none of this is actually true. But I think much of this is sensational, all right? Much of this is just embellished for the sake of embellishing it, for the sake of making it more palatable to the audience that's reading it or listening to it or however it is you're receiving it. And that's what Herodotus had in mind. Remember, Herodotus, the author of most of what we're relying upon in terms of the primary sources that we're relying upon, understood how to tell a good story. He was a fantastical storyteller, okay? And oftentimes it's to be a good historian, okay, to be a good communicator of history, to be a good communicator of a lot of things, you have to, as a prerequisite, you must also be a good storyteller. Now, Herodotus was an excellent storyteller, but again, that's problematic in the sense that he was such a good storyteller, and he was a very imaginative and creative sort of guy. All right, I think he had a very active imagination. And he allowed that imagination to interject itself and interpose itself, intrude itself in a rather obtrusive manner into what would otherwise maybe be a less adulterated historical narrative, right? And so he's interjecting elements of this plot to make it more sensational, to make it more interesting, to make it more compelling. But these sensationalist embellishments don't really belong there. And there's really very little, we don't have any sort of mechanism available to us to authenticate the veracity of much of what Herodotus is saying. And that's why I always qualify, well, according to Herodotus, right? It's like according to, you know, John or Matthew, Mark or Luke, right? According to whoever wrote this particular screed, right, from the New Testament, right? According to this particular person, this is what actually transpired. Whether or not that's what happened, I don't know. We don't know. Nobody can know, okay? So we have to rely upon him because it's the only really viable option we have if we hope to aspire to have any real, full, comprehensive understanding of what was actually happening. Because the only other option, and going back to the primary sources that we have, you will recall that I talked about the Narbondius Chronicle. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And again, pronunciation in this class doesn't count, spelling doesn't count, grammar doesn't count, really very little counts. I mean, there's some things obviously do count. I mean, your ability to comprehensively and intelligibly articulate your position in a way that's sensible to me and resonates with me, that counts, okay? But so the Narbondius Chronicle is the only other extant primary source that we have available to us. Now that's not very good because it's like a puzzle, right? And we only have a few pieces of that puzzle. Right, we got a piece here, and that shows a picture of a guy's face, and then we got a piece over here, and that shows a picture of the wall of Babylon, and then we got this picture over here that shows, you know, the Sphinx in Egypt, and that's it, okay? And then we got a picture over here, and there's some sand in that picture, right? We put those all together, and well, it doesn't really make much sense, okay? And that maybe that source is more accurate. It has a higher degree of historical authenticity and therefore objective veracity ascribed to it, but it's not fully intact. Okay, it comes down to us in a very parcellated manner. Okay, so that should bring us up to where I think I left off, or relative to where I left off. I was talking about Cyrus became a young, strapping man. He was able to overthrow his grandfather, this nefarious and invidious old Astyages, who plotted to kill him, literally strangle him in his crib. And he becomes a great leader. And one of the things that they said about Cyrus was that he was a man before his time. Okay, this is, when I say they, I mean Herodotus, because he's really the only person that's commenting on what Cyrus did and said, and all these other things. He was a man before his time, and what I mean by that is to say that he was an enlightened ruler. Now, what we have to understand is enlightenment, the extent to which somebody is enlightened, is relative to the historical context in which they existed. And so, for us to say that Cyrus was an enlightened ruler, if we were able to magically go back in time and then transport Cyrus to the year 2020 and appoint Cyrus the president of the United States, that's actually a very bad example, because we have arguably not a particularly enlightened president in the Oval Office right now. But I think compared to somebody like, I don't know, Ronald Reagan, right? Or somebody even more categorically enlightened, Abraham Lincoln, right? George Washington, right? I think if we were to transport Cyrus to the 21st century, or even the 20th century, or the 19th century in the case of Lincoln, or the 18th century in the case of Washington, you'd say, well, by comparison to those guys, he's not really that enlightened, okay? He's not, I mean, he's not a very progressive ruler. He doesn't take into consideration the interests and the well-being and the sensibilities of his constituents. But that's not judging, that's not adjudicating the degree to which Cyrus is enlightened and compassionate and altruistic and gracious and ahead of his time. That's not looking at that and adjudicating that relative to the way that we ought to really arbitrate these things. Because what you got to ask yourself is, how good of a ruler was Cyrus in the context in which he ruled, in the place and in the time, okay? And again, this goes back to the point that I originally made about looking at sources contextually and not having to argue for a change of venue, right? Not saying that if I go out there and I commit a crime in Baraga, right, and I'm going to be subjected to a jury of my peers, ostensibly according to the Fourth Amendment, right, and I end up having a jury of Native Americans who don't identify with me or commiserate with me or empathize with me in any way, shape, or form, right? In fact, they all think of me as an outsider. And that doesn't constitute a jury of my peers. So remember, we have to look at these things objectively and impartially and dispassionately. And most importantly, we have to evaluate the justice of a particular ruler and his fairness and how equitable he was and how conscientious and etc. The virtue of a man, the virtue of any ruler, right? Relative to his time. Now, the reason we say that Cyrus was a particularly enlightened ruler was because he was very equitable in his treatment of different people. And he was a very tolerant ruler in terms of different religions. And this is not something that we see at this particular time. This is not something that was pervasive amongst the character and the quality of the rulers at this particular juncture in history, and certainly not in this particular place in time. So we look at that and we say, he was enlightened for his time. What are some of the anecdotal illustrations that I can call to mind to substantiate this claim that Cyrus was in fact an enlightened ruler relative to his fellow rulers at this time? Well, I can say when he went to Babylon, I'm going to talk about how Cyrus was a conqueror, but we're also going to talk about how he treated those whom he conquered. And par for the course at this time, right? It was pretty conventional, standard operating procedure. If you conquered a people, those people were completely beholden to you. They were subject to whatever caprice or malignancy or whatever despicable ideas you had in your mind. They were beholden to you completely. Okay, they had no recourse. They had no appeal. Right. So if you took over a people and you wanted to enslave the women and the children and just execute all the men, you were completely at liberty to do so. And that was, again, that was more often, that was what happened in the ancient times. When we're talking about this in the context of ancient Babylon and the context of early Persia, that's typically what would happen. Right. Now, when Cyrus would come into a land that he had recently conquered and acquired through military exploit, he wouldn't execute people. He wouldn't even relocate people. Remember the Assyrians, the Nazis of ancient Mesopotamia, right? They would relocate people, this ethnic cleansing, right? To remove these people, forcibly relocate these people from this area. Cyrus didn't do any of that, right? In fact, he did the opposite of that, right? So the story about his conquest of Babylon, I think, is anecdotal and demonstrative at this point. He got to Babylon. He conquered Babylon. We're going to talk about this here in a minute. And he found people living in Babylon who were very dissimilar from the Babylonians. Very dissimilar from the Babylonians. And sorry about that, guys. I was wondering to myself there for a minute whether or not I actually hit record, and thank God I am recording, because otherwise that would have been 30 minutes of me just talking to myself and wouldn't have been on record. He looked at these people living amongst the Babylonians, and he said, "Oh, these people have long beards. They wear these fancy little hats. They speak this language. It is unintelligible to the people that are endemic to Babylon. Who are these people?" Well, it turns out those were the ancient Hebrews, the people who were domiciled in Palestine, that King Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonians, or not, sorry, not the Babylonians, excuse me, the Assyrians, right, who took over Babylon and took over a lot of areas, right, conquered much of the Middle East because he had a combined arms military, right? Nebuchadnezzar encountered those people, and what did he do? Well, he forcibly relocated them. He relocated the ancient Hebrews from ancient Palestine in Judea and these other places, Canaan. He relocated them from the Levant, from the Middle East, all the way out to Babylon. And he said, now you will live here. Okay, now the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of, I don't know, Abraham and whoever else, right? Some of the tribes of Israel were forcibly, coercively, militarily relocated by Nebuchadnezzar of the Assyrians. And these people have been living in Babylon ever since. Now, Cyrus comes into Babylon as a conqueror, right? Resplendent in his robes, with his soldiers, with the spears and with their chariots and etc. And the Babylonians are thinking to themselves, well, we're all left. You know, he's going to put us to death. He's going to enslave our women and children. They're going to be raped and they're going to be beholden to the whims of these Persians. Well, that's not what happened. That's not at all what happened. And again, what he did, in my estimation, okay, and this is subject to interpretation, but I think what Cyrus did actually was in many ways the antithesis of what an ancient conqueror would typically conventionally do when he acquired new territory and acquired the people that were associated with that territory. Cyrus liberated the Jews. He liberated the ancient Hebrews. He said, go forth, people of Yahweh. Go forth and return to thy homeland. Return to Judah. Return to Canaan. Return to ancient Israel and Palestine. You are free from your bondage. I liberate you. You are hereby free to go. Now, why did he do this? He didn't have to do that. He could have said, well, yeah, they're already resident aliens. You know, they've been here for however many generations now, which is a lot, many generations going all the way back to the Assyrians. They've been there for hundreds of years, right? Why would Cyrus have this compelling interest to see to it that this past wrong was redressed, that this wrong that had this collective wrong that had been inflicted upon the ancient Israelites by somebody who Cyrus had no responsibility for, no accountability for the acts of the Assyrians. He wasn't even born. He wasn't around at that time, right? This is the idea of vicarious liability, vicarious responsibility for the actions of somebody who did something, right, before you came into existence, did something that was morally reprehensible, did something that if you in fact had been there at that time, you would have been morally obligated to prevent them from doing that, but yet you are somehow responsible for the sins that eventuate from that act that you had no control over, right, that devolve upon you, right? This is vicarious liability or vicarious sinfulness. And this, what I'm alluding to here is the idea of redemption, the notion that, well, because we all collectively crucified Christ, that therefore we, humanity, has this collective guilt that is weighing us down upon our conscience, our collective conscience as humanity, and we have to redeem ourselves of that. But I think that the point is similar with respect to Cyrus and his relationship to the Assyrians, who were responsible for originally capturing the Israelites and relocating them forcibly to Babylon. So he has no real affirmative duty. He has no moral or fiduciary obligation or duty under international law or the laws of the Persians. They didn't care about these things. Why would he do this? Discounting the possibility that this is just some phantasmagorical, fanciful, fictitious story that Herodotus made up. It was an invention of the very creative mind of Herodotus. Let's discount that. I don't think that's. I think that's less likely. I think it's more likely that Cyrus probably did in fact liberate the ancient Israelites from their what's known as the Babylonian captivity. Why did he do this? Well, he wanted to demonstrate that not only was he powerful, not only was he militarily assertive and militarily competent in that he could go out there and he could conquer other lands and he could subjugate these people if he so wanted, right? But he decided that I proved my power, I proved my military preeminence, I've already established that I'm the biggest, baddest guy in ancient Mesopotamia, right, in ancient Persia and Babylon and Chaldea and all these other areas, right? Now, what would the point be to enslave and to murder all the people who I conquered? What would that point be? What would that do? Well, that would just show that I'm falling in line and behaving consistently with the status quo, that I'm doing what every other ruler before me would have reasonably done in the circumstances. But alas, I am Cyrus. I am different. I am charting a new, more gracious, more altruistic and compassionate course. And I am therefore going to liberate those whom I otherwise would be inclined to enslave and murder. Now, I think that shows a certain nobility, a nobility of character. It shows that not only does it show that he's altruistic and he's compassionate, and he's obviously more gracious and generous than those who came before him, but it also shows that he's a shrewd cultivator of his own legacy. Remember, I was talking to you guys about Ramses, King Ramses, the great Ramses, the guy who liked to build obelisks and big giant statues of himself all over ancient Egypt. Well, he was his own best publicist. Okay, he was his own best propagandist. Okay, it's not like, you know, Donald Trump and Obama before him and Bush and Clinton before them. They got a White House press secretary, and they've got these people who go out there who act as their proxies and speak on their behalf. You know, they're ventriloquists. They ventriloquize on behalf of the president. Well, no, Ramses was his own best representative. He was his own press secretary, and I think that in many ways Cyrus was analogous to that. He had the same relationship to power and to his capacity to go ahead and cultivate a certain image and a certain legacy that was categorically positive, right, with respect to the power that he had. He wasn't just satisfied with acquiring power and dominance and dominion over all the people who he conquered, which, you know, he could have been satisfied with that, right? But he also wanted people, subsequent generations, to speak highly of him and to regard him with adulation and great awe, and say the sorts of things that we're saying about him right now, 2,500 years later, after the fact, right? We're saying that he was a great man, right? We're saying that he was enlightened. We're saying that he was prescient. He was a man ahead of his time, right? He was progressive in relation to his contemporaries. And that, I think, is the ultimate achievement, right? This goes back, I think this harkens back in many ways, allegorically anyways, to the point that I made in conjunction with the story of Gilgamesh, right? Don't just go out there and be strong and go to the gym and lift as much weights as you possibly can and take a bunch of roids and juice and get, you know, really huge and just go smacking people around. You can do that. You can certainly do that, right? You can go out there and kick some ass, right? But no. Have the power, have the capacity, have the physical wherewithal to be able to do that, to project your power, and indeed do so when necessary, when it's just, when it's equitable to do so, right? But also show that you are compassionate and merciful in victory. And that way, your legacy will transcend your own time, and people will immortalize your deeds. Your legacy will be imperishable, and so too, therefore, will be your glory. And I think that therefore, is the message that we can take away from these allegorical stories about Cyrus doing these very generous and gracious and I think noble things, virtuous things. We can say that they are categorically virtuous regardless of when he did these things or what time or what place in the context in which they happen. Okay, interesting fact. What does Cyrus the Great have in common with Oskar Schindler? Oskar Schindler, the eponymous protagonist or anti-hero from Schindler's List, the movie that won all those Oscars back in 1994. And I know very few of you were actually around at that time, but you don't necessarily need to be around at that time to know the existence of the movie Schindler's List. What does Cyrus the Great have in common with Oskar Schindler? Sounds like a rather strange question to ask, right? Well, it is kind of a strange question to ask, but I would submit to you that if you actually think about this, right, if you go through scrupulously and analyze that, right, you'll see that there is an underlying commonality between them, right? Think about the relationship that Cyrus had with the ancient Israelites. Think about what the modern iteration of the Israelites, okay, the successors of the ancient tribe of Judah and the sons of Shem and Ham and Abraham and the followers of Yahweh, right, in the 1940s, right, those are the same people. They were descendants, right, from the ancient tribe of Israel. The modern Jews in Europe were their descendants. Now, what do they have in common? Well, they have great regard and respect and reverence for the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people who go out of their way and treat the Hebrews, the Jewish people, with compassion and consideration. Because for many, many generations, the Jews were used to being chased around and murdered and robbed and subjugated and enslaved and treated in an altogether disreputable manner. And so the thing that Cyrus and Oskar Schindler have in common, incidentally, is that they are both considered by the modern day state of Israel, in fact, they are both considered to be, quote unquote, righteous amongst the nations. Okay, righteous amongst the nations. And if you were declared to be righteous amongst the nations by the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, the representative of collective, the collective Jewish faith around the world, then you are revered and you are honored. It's kind of like a prophet, right? A prophet in the Christian canonical doctrines, or somebody who is a saint, right? And the reason the ancient Hebrews, and indeed the reason their ancestors, their modern day equivalent, antecedents, regard Cyrus so highly is because he liberated these people from Babylon, and he didn't have to. Okay, so I think that's interesting. Let's talk a little bit about what else Cyrus was doing at this time. So we find that Cyrus, as I said before, was a conqueror, and one of the places that Cyrus conquers is known as the Lydian Empire. The Lydian Empire, Lydian. And the Lydian Empire is located in modern-day Anatolia, which is Asia Minor, which is also central Turkey. And at that particular time, 2,600 years ago, give or take a few hundred years, the Lydian Empire was ruled over by a man by the name of Croesus. Okay, Croesus. This is on the slides, and the slide that I'm on right now says Ancient Persia, and then the subheading is Cyrus the Great, and then it's got the dates of his life and the dates of his rule. Now, Croesus was kind of like the Bill Gates of the ancient world. I used to use Bill Gates, but I can't really use Bill Gates anymore because he's not the wealthiest man in the world anymore. I think it's not Warren Buffett. I think it's the guy behind Amazon. It's Jeff Bezos. Okay, so Croesus was the Jeff Bezos of the ancient world, and it's said by Herodotus, because there's nobody else who says these things. It's said that Croesus loved his money, and he loved his power, and he loved his women, and he loved his wine. And he was a rather jovial fellow. He liked to play games. He liked to have fun. He liked to get drunk and have a good time, right? Sounds like the kind of guy I like to hang out with, right? One of the other things that Croesus liked to do was count his gold, right? He was very, very proud, very, very self-satisfied with all the riches that he had accrued over the course of his many years as ruler of Lydia. And it's said, this is a rather apocryphal story, meaning that we should question its veracity and its legitimacy, but it said that one day a philosopher was wandering around the lands of Croesus, the lands of Lydia, which are incidentally the lands ruled by Croesus. And the philosopher wanders up to the capital, wherever that was in ancient Anatolia, and he goes to the palace of Croesus. Croesus invites him, and he says, I heard you're a wise philosopher from Greece or someplace, and you're trained in the philosophical arts. I want to hear what you think about certain things here. And so the philosopher comes in, and he sits down with Croesus at his dinner table, and they sit down and they start eating chicken or whatever. And Croesus turns to the philosopher, the wandering philosopher. He says, yeah. So what do you think about? Oh no, that's not what he says. He says, I'm telling the story wrong. I'm telling the story in reverse order. He says, tell me, O philosophically enlightened one. Tell me, O sagacious one. Tell me, O wise one. Tell me, who's the happiest person you've ever encountered? And the philosopher pauses for a minute, and he says, oh, well, you know what? I think the happiest person I've ever encountered was the father whose son went out and died gloriously in the field of battle, because that father had such pride and satisfaction knowing that his son achieved the ultimate honor by sacrificing his life for his comrades in battle against the enemy. That therefore is the true lesson of life. To be intrinsically satisfied by the deeds of somebody who you can take pride in what they've done, and you can live with that pride, and it drives you, and it compels you, and it's something that animates you throughout the rest of your life. And Croesus thinks to himself, well, that doesn't seem like that guy's very happy, right? That's not a very good story, right? And Croesus is sitting there, and he's sitting there on his throne all the time. He's got his chalice there, and he's got his gold crown here, and he's got some money over here. He's got some gold coins. He's got some shekels here. And he says, well, you know, that guy doesn't sound very happy. Are you sure that's the happiest guy you've ever known? And the philosopher pauses for a moment. He says, well, you know, actually, you know, now that you think about it, there's actually somebody else that I know that was even happier than that person. Croesus says, oh, really? Really? There's somebody happier than that? And Croesus is kind of jumping in his gold, and he's throwing it around. And the philosopher says, yeah, actually, I now that I can recall to mind, there's this woman that I knew. And she had two sons back in Greece, and she had to go to the market one day but she was too feeble, too decrepit, too old to walk to the market herself. So she had her sons tied up to this mule cart, and they didn't have any oxen or anything to pull the cart because they were too poor. And she hooked her sons up to the mule cart, and they pulled her through the streets all the way to the market so she could do her shopping. And then they both fell over and expired and died right there because they were so exhausted from pulling their mother through the streets of this Greek city in this ox cart. And Croesus is befuddled. He's consternated by this. He says, that's a ridiculous story. You know, why would she be happy at that? Why would she be satisfied with that? And the philosopher says, but you missed the point, my son. He says, the reason why she'd be satisfied is because she realizes, like the old man that I told you about before, she realizes that those sons, those two sons that she had such a love and a reverence for her that they were compelled by that love to go out there and to sacrifice their own lives for the love of their mother, so that their mother didn't have to walk to the market. And Croesus says, I don't know about that. And Croesus says, well, what about me? You know, look at this. Look at this. I got this great kingdom here. I'm ruling all over all these people. I got all these women in my harem over here. I got all this fine wine here. Look at all this money. I got this giant treasure trove, and I just go in there and I swim in my gold coins every day because that's what makes me happy. What about me? Look at how happy I am. And he says, the philosopher says, but Croesus, the things that you have are all temporary. They are all momentary. You may enjoy the life that you have right now. You may live for the moment, but that moment is only momentary. Okay, and it is a moment that will not last for the rest of your life. And the one thing that is certain about all of our lives, Croesus, is that the only thing in this world that is constant is change. And your situation, come as it may, invariably, it's not a question of when, it's a question of if, right? Or it's a question of when, rather, not if. Your situation will change, and it will change for the worse. And when that happens, you will wish that you had sons that you could be proud of. You will wish that you had somebody whose actions were so self-sacrificial and so selfless that you could take pride from that, as opposed to take pride in these temporary things, because wealth is not the way to happiness. And after that rather interesting story that the philosopher tells Croesus, Croesus thinks about that. He says, yeah, that sounds idiotic, right? And what ends up happening shortly after this encounter that Croesus has, this alleged encounter that he has with this philosopher, is that Croesus has this son. He's his only son, of course. And the only son goes out and he's hunting wild boar or wildebeest or whatever he's hunting out there in ancient Turkey. And he ends up being killed in a hunting accident by his own best friend. Okay? And it was an accident. And so therefore Croesus mourns the loss of his son, right? But he can't punish anybody. There's no justice in the cause against the person who was responsible for the death of his son, because it was the son's best friend, and he killed Croesus' son negligently, unintentionally. And Croesus' wife, likewise, because she's so overcome with guilt that she just can't bear to live with herself after this, she commits suicide upon learning the death of her son. And it's only at this time, according to Herodotus, that Croesus really begins to reflect upon what the philosopher had told him. And he says, if only I had heeded the advice of that wise philosopher, if only I hadn't been so consumed with all the materialistic trappings of my ostentatious wealth, if only I had thought more about taking care of those who I loved, and etc. And that's the moral of the story, is that you shouldn't be focused on the things that are superficial in this life. You should focus on the things that really have intrinsic value, like being satisfied with the achievements of your family and being satisfied with the achievements of yourself, right? These are the things that are transcendent. They transcend our own lives, whereas our wealth does not. It's not. It's transcendent in the sense that you can give a legacy to your sons or your daughters in inheritance, but in that sense, it doesn't really have a lasting legacy. Okay, so that's a bit of a moral story there. But there's a lot of moral sermonizing in Herodotus, so you got to take the morality tales with the history, and they're sort of inseparable here. Okay, so then it said that Croesus consults with an oracle, and an oracle was usually a young girl, because that's who they thought made the best oracles, because they thought, well, young girls are very good at communicating with the gods, because young girls tend to be very emotional and sometimes very erratic and spontaneous and things. and that those qualities, those features that were inherent to young adolescent girls were thought to be most conducive to engaging in some kind of metaphysical dialogue with the gods. And so there's this oracle, okay, this young girl, and Croesus says, you know, I'm thinking about expanding my empire. I'm thinking about going out and actually initiating offensive military operations against the Persians next door to me over there. There's Cyrus over there, and you know Cyrus, he's distracted. He's over there in the far eastern area of his empire, and his empire is very vast. It's very large. He's out there fighting the Babylonians and the Chaldeans and everybody else, and he's distracted. And I think this might be a propitious and very opportune time for me to initiate an assault against the empire of Persia, the empire of Cyrus. And he asked the oracle for the advice that she's going to communicate to him, because she's the ventriloquist for the gods, right? The oracle is the puppet of the gods. The gods are the puppet masters of all of us, right? Whether you're an oracle or whether you're a great hero like Achilles or Hector or Odysseus, we are all moved by the gods. The gods move us. The gods, this is the belief that the ancient peoples had, that everything that we did is sort of predestined or it's prearranged by the gods, and the gods are the puppeteers and they're masterminding everything that happens in this world. And the oracle says, in rather ambiguous phraseology, euphemistically says, well, Croesus, oh my king, Croesus, if you attack the Persians, a great empire will be destroyed. A great empire will be destroyed. And Croesus thinks to himself, well, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Well, a great empire will be destroyed. Well, the Persians, Cyrus has got a great empire over there. I'm going to go over there and attack, and I'm going to destroy his great empire. Well, that's one interpretation of that particular oracular prophecy. But see, the problem with oracles is the same problem when you go to somebody who's going to read your fortune, right? They got the magic 8-ball, or they read the palms, or they have the seance and they commune with the dead, or whatever it is they do, right? They have these metaphysical means available to them, ostensibly, anyways, by which they can anticipate or project or see what your future is going to be with some measure of clairvoyance. Now, these people always speak in very euphemistic and very ambiguous language, right? Because they say, I see great change in your future, right? I see great changes are going to happen in your future sometime, right? Well, I mean, I could say that about anybody. Okay, that's a statement that can be made about anybody, right? It's only a matter of time before eventually one of you, or indeed myself, will experience great change sometime in our future. So the more ambiguous you are as a prophet, as somebody who's making prophecies, especially for a king, especially when you're going to be held accountable if in fact that prophecy is wrong, doesn't turn out to be accurate, then you got to be very shrewd and clever and rather devious and deceptive in terms of how you actually make these pronouncements. And so the other interpretation so Croesus attacks Persia, right? He attacks and invades Persia, and lo and behold, because Cyrus is such a great man, and because Cyrus is very militarily gifted, he's able to understand what he needs to do militarily, and he responds, and he's able to overwhelm Croesus militarily with his force, and Croesus is defeated. And not only is he defeated in terms of his army, but he's also invaded, because if you invade Persia, right, you unilaterally, without provocation, you invade another country. It doesn't have to be Persia, any country, right? You invade another country without provocation, and that country is defending itself, okay? They're not going to stop at the border which formerly delineated your two realms. They're not going to stop there. They're going to continue to kick your ass all the way back to wherever you came from, and then some, right? It's like the Soviets fighting against the Germans in 1944 and 1945. They didn't stop at the line that demarcated the boundary line between what was the Soviet Union and what was Poland at that time. They invaded Poland, and then they invaded Romania, and then they invaded Hungary, and then they invaded Yugoslavia, and then they invaded Germany, and they went all the way to Berlin. And that's what the Persians did. And the Persians went all the way through Lydia, the realm of Croesus, and they finally conquered the entire place. And Croesus is mortified. And but then he reflects upon what the oracle said. And remember, the oracle said, if you attack the Persians, a great empire will be defeated. Well, they didn't say which great empire, right? It could have been him. It could have been the Persians. It could have been anybody, including Croesus, right? And in fact, that's what happened. Okay, so I think that's. I mean, that particular prophecy lends itself to a. I mean, it's a binary analysis, right? It's either one or the other. Okay, it's gonna be either you're gonna defeat yourself or it's gonna be the defeat of the Persians, and it ended up that he guessed wrong. So what happens? Well, according to Herodotus, what happens is that Croesus is defeated, and he's lost his power, he's lost his men, he's lost his women, he's lost his wine, he's lost his wealth. Most importantly, that's the most terrible thing for him, and he's on his knees before on his knees, kneeling down before Cyrus and asking for mercy. And Cyrus, true to form, says, I grant you pardon, Croesus, even though you unilaterally initiated this assault against me, even though you had no good cause to attack me, even though you did this without any provocation whatsoever. You did this merely for the sake of greed, because you wanted to go and conquer new territory so you could tax the people living there, so you could get more gold and have more gold to play around with and swim in your giant vaults back there. And that's not a good reason to attack another country. That's a very bad reason. That's not a very compelling reason at all. But even though you did this for bad reasons, for selfish reasons, I'm still going to allow you, I'm going to grant you reprieve. I'm going to allow you to not just retain your life, but I'm going to take you on as an advisor, as a counselor. Now this doesn't really make any sense to me at all, but this is according to the story, and the story, as far as we're concerned, is synonymous with the history because it's the only story that we have. And Croesus becomes an advisor of Cyrus, and he sort of follows Cyrus around. It becomes like a buddy movie, right? Like a sidekick buddy movie, like Chris Farley and David Spade, or I can't remember anybody else because it doesn't get any better than that. It's like that, right? And Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly. Okay, so Cyrus is Will Ferrell and Croesus is John C. Reilly. Right? He's a sidekick. He's his buddy. He's kind of stupid. He doesn't really think very lucidly, and that's the problem. That's the paradox here, of course, is that why would you take somebody who obviously is not very clever, who's not very calculating in his plannings and his machinations, and as a ruler, as a king and as a ruler, he's a very impetuous ruler, a very selfish ruler, one who doesn't really give much consideration to things that matter the most. That's the whole point of the story, of course, is why would you take that guy on as your advisor? Well, of course, the story is meant to show that Croesus is somebody who's capable of changing, right? He's capable of making progress, right? Self-actualization, self-realization, self-enlightenment, all these sorts of things that are conducive to self-improvement. And the idea is that the notion here is that, well, the more time Croesus spends with Cyrus, who is enlightened, who is very sagacious and wise, and has all the sorts of virtues that we would hope that a good king would have. The more time that Croesus spends with Cyrus, the more he reforms his ways, the more he begins to aspire to become a new man. He reinvents himself, and he lives up to the reprieve that Cyrus granted him. Okay, it's like saying that you haven't earned this yet, right? You haven't earned the right to live yet. You Croesus deserve to die, right? For stupidly, foolishly attacked, for listening to that stupid girl, right, who was probably, smoking crack when she gave that prophecy, right, for listening to her, first of all, and then secondly, for not having any good pretext, any good justification, no casus belli, no reason to actually go to war with Persia. You just went ahead and went to war for your own selfish, maniacal reasons, okay? For that alone, you deserve to die, okay? But Cyrus granted him that reprieve. He offered him salvation. He said, I'm going to let you live. Right? So it's kind of like, if you guys have seen the movie Saving Private Ryan. At the very end of Saving Private Ryan, I'm not going to give it away, but Tom Hanks and some other guys go over there and they save Matt Damon's character. Okay, they save the eponymous protagonist in the movie, Private Ryan. Right, and most of the guys who end up doing the saving, they end up dying because they're out there in Carentan or some town in Normandy in northern France. And the Germans are shooting at them, and they're blowing them up, and they lose a lot of lives in the process. Well, anyways, Matt Damon's character, Private Ryan, ends up surviving, but he's one of the few survivors at the end of it. And Tom Hanks, at the end of the movie, I'm not going to tell you what happens to Tom Hanks, but Tom Hanks turns to Private Ryan, Matt Damon, and he says, "Earn this. earn the sacrifice that all of these men were willing to make on your behalf, so that you could go back and be reunited with your mother, because 4 of your brothers died in combat and the Department of the Army decided that it was a good idea to go and rescue you. He says, earn this, right? Well, I think that's the lesson, that's the takeaway with respects to the story of Croesus, right? Is you could say, earn the reprieve that Cyrus is granting you, right? Earn that right. Earn the right to not be sentenced to death, right? You're being allowed to live, right? You're being spared, even though Cyrus would have every right to execute you for being, you know, impudent and imprudent and foolish in terms of how you conduct yourself in your foreign policy, and being obviously, you know, self-aggrandizing and very egomaniacal. You deserve to die, right? But he spared you, and indeed Croesus does in fact earn that. He retrospectively earns that reprieve because he becomes a better man. Whether or not he became a better man because he was spared and he was thinking to himself, well, you know, I really need to reflect upon this, and this is going to be my cathartic moment, and I'm going to go out and become, you know, it's like a born again. What is it? Those experiences, those near-death experiences people have. You always have to question the credibility of those claims, because of course people are, you know, they're going in and out of consciousness, and they're experiencing visions that are a byproduct of the neurophysiology, the chemistry of the brain, right? So there's a neurological explanation for why you would be experiencing something that would be in many ways comparable to an out-of-body experience. But people who have those out-of-body experiences, then they think, I'm going to go out there and reform my life. I'm going to stop smoking. I'm going to stop, you know, whatever it is, they're drinking, gambling. I don't know. And that's kind of what happened to Croesus. Okay, so that's the long version of the story of Croesus. Now, I guess we should talk a little bit about what happens after this. So Cyrus decides that he's going to go and conquer all the various other kingdoms that are competing for hegemony and control over Mesopotamia at this time. Iran and Iraq, right? The ancient Iran and Iraq. And Cyrus is very successful in conquering these people, because what Cyrus does is he's a much more just and compassionate and considerate ruler than the people whom he's competing against. And so the people who are under the overlordship of the Neo-Assyrian Empire and the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and these are the other kingdoms that Cyrus is going to war with, they don't want to be ruled by their present rulers, because they look over there in Persia, they look next door and they say, the Persians, they've got this enlightened, progressive ruler who treats these people fair and very equitably. We wish we could have that. We aspire to that. All right. And so when you're not able to cultivate and sustain the loyalty of the constituent people whom you're ruling over, and those people feel a stronger affinity and connection with your antagonist, well, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to maintain any semblance of control. And so I think that was another reason why Cyrus acted in the way that he did. And he advertised these things very conspicuously. He advertised the fact that he granted the king of Lydia, he granted Croesus reprieve, that he freed these ancient Hebrews from their Babylonian captivity. He tolerated all sorts of religions and different ethnic minorities, etc. The reason he was advertising this, the reason he wanted this to be as explicit as possible, is because he figured, well, the more people that know about this, the more those foreigners will be desirous of being ruled by me and the Persians, because they know that rule will be fair and equitable, and it will treat them in a way that is congenial to their interests, right? That it's not going to be harsh and capricious and totalitarian and just subject to the whims of the king, right? That we're going to do things in a way that is modulated by justice and compassion and consideration for the interests and the well-being of the citizenry collectively. And if that's how the Persians decide to rule, well, then that makes them preferable. It's not just a matter of might makes right. Okay, that's the other point that I think we can take away from Herodotus, is that it's not only that the Persians are more mighty than their adversaries, which they are militarily. They're stronger, they're more powerful. They have the ability to achieve conquest over them militarily, right? But they're also morally superior to their adversaries, right? And so that gives them, in a way, that gives them a right or an entitlement, a higher form of entitlement to rule over these people, right? It gives them that right by virtue of the fact that that Cyrus, anyways. Okay, let's not make too much of a generalization here, but that Cyrus, anyways, in terms of how he rules, and the fact that he's enlightened, and the fact that he's noble and virtuous, and etc., the fact, and relative to the contemporary, the rulers that are contemporaneous with him, the fact that he is all those things, right? Well, that would suggest that that confers a certain measure of legitimacy upon him, that history has adjudged him, but by Herodotus' standards, anyways, and I think by any reasonable objective standard, that history, that we collectively, because we are history, right? We are the judges, rather, of history. We are the ones who look back and reflect upon whether or not this was just, whether or not this was equitable, whether or not this person was tyrannical, or were they a fair and progressive-minded king. And I think that history has made that judgment and said that Cyrus and the Persians were, in fact, good rulers. They treated these people that were otherwise subjugated and enslaved or murdered outright, or physically, coercively transplanted, since the Assyrians were doing that, right? They treated these people with some consideration. They may not with complete equity. I mean, they didn't give them civil rights and civil liberties like the U.S. Constitution would give them, but for that time, they treated them very fairly. All right. So Cyrus defeats the Neo-Babylonian Empire. He conquers Babylon. This is when he encounters the ancient Hebrews, and he says, I'm going to go ahead and not just spare you. I'm not going to enslave you. I'm going to stay my hand and not slay, or I'm not going to kill or enslave you, but I'm going to reprieve you. I'm going to restore you back to your original land. And that's something that was unheard of at that time. And he defeats all the other competing kingdoms. And at that point, he decides to declare himself king of the four corners of the world. Because as far as the Persians and the people living in Mesopotamia and ancient Iran and Iraq were concerned, that was the world. That was the known world. I mean, they knew about Egypt, right? They knew about certain islands in the Mediterranean and the Aegean. They knew about Greece, certainly, right? But as far as they were concerned, that was the extent of the world, right? That was the part of the world that really mattered, okay? And Cyrus was the first king that had unified all those various constituent peoples that were very, very different from each other in terms of their ethnicity, in terms of their language, in terms of where they came from, their traditions, their beliefs, etc. Cyrus is the first person to come along and to be able to unify all those people under one contiguous, monolithic form of rule. And so that's substantial, that's significant, and that's why he declared himself king of the four corners of the world, because he wanted to enunciate and accentuate the fact that he's not just king of this kingdom or this empire or this state or this whatever, right? This sovereign entity. He's king of the four corners of the world. And that's pretty definitive, right? To be able to say that, I mean, that's meaningful, okay? That asserts something, okay? It asserts that you are king of all that matters, okay? You're king of all that matters, right? And that's the point that I think Cyrus was making when he proclaimed this rather ostentatious title for himself. All right. I'm really going to make an effort to finish this up in the next 20 minutes because I want to spare you. I think I made this pledge to you guys. I don't want to say I made a promise, because then if I didn't actually fulfill that promise, that would make me look incredibly disingenuous and reneging on a pledge or on a promise. But I think what I said before in the last video that I promulgated to you guys was that I'm going to try to cut this down so that it's not as loquacious and meandering as many of my other videos have been. So we're going to try to consolidate here for the next 15 minutes or whatever we get left. So one of the last things that we know about Cyrus, one of the last things that Herodotus reports to us anyways about Cyrus, I mean, there may have been more things that Cyrus did, but we just don't know about them, is that it said that he went out and he decided to conquer what was then known as Scythia, or Scythia. Okay, I think it's pronounced Scythia. Scythia, I think, and I should actually be looking at the slides right now so we know where the hell we're even at. So for those of you who are, hopefully any of you listening to this are following along with the slides, and by the way, I should just mention this. I mean, I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again because I think it bears repeating. If for any reason it's difficult for you to follow along with what I'm saying, because the YouTube format doesn't really lend itself to viewing the slides simultaneous with this lecture, right? What I could do is I could just go ahead and this is a proposition that I'm actually going to make before you guys right here and now, and I would prefer that you guys send me an email. Don't make comments in the comment section of the YouTube video, because that's public domain and we don't know who's looking at that. So, but here's the proposition. What I could do in lieu of doing these YouTube videos for the next couple of weeks anyways, because that's about how long it's going to be before I can say definitively that I can go back up north and live in a house, because my parents are going to be up there at that time. What I could do is I can give you guys access to the online version of this course that I taught last semester or the semester before. I've taught this a couple of times now online, and I've got recordings, audio recordings that I've embedded in the YouTube not the YouTube, the PowerPoint slides themselves. All right, so I've got audio recordings, audio files that I have embedded in the slide itself. So you would just open a PowerPoint as you conventionally do, right? And then you'd see, you know, the pictures and the whatever, the bullet points that I got on there. And then you've got what looks to be, it's like a little microphone. It's like a little icon that's embedded in the slide. And you just click on that, and then you get to hear me, okay? Now, I don't know, some of you would prefer, perhaps, I presuppose, maybe I'm wrong assuming this, but I would believe that some of you would prefer to have the video feed supplementary to just my voice speaking to you. Maybe some of you don't care, and it would be actually more expedient and pragmatic for you to have my voice in conjunction with the slides. So you're getting me talking about the slides, you know, simultaneous with the slide, right? As opposed to me having to rely upon the assumption that you actually have the slides there with you while you're listening to this video. And maybe that's distracting. I don't know. I don't know how how extensive your attention span is, and whether or not you're able to bifurcate your attention and say, well, I can sort of compartmentalize this and look at him and see what he's doing, but also look at the slides and sort of cross-reference that and be able to juxtapose those two and reconcile them. I don't know if you can do all that. Maybe that's difficult. I don't know. I haven't tried. I don't listen to my own lectures. I think I told you guys, I can't bear to listen to myself, and I certainly can't bear to see myself and hear myself. That's the worst thing ever. You have to hold a gun to my head and force me to do that. So what I'm saying here is that the proposition I have is to go ahead and grant all of you guys, all of you 10, I think 9 or 10 that are still enrolled in this class. I think all 10 of you guys are still enrolled in this class. It's too late to get your money back from the college. I think that was week 4 in the term. It was a Friday. It was many weeks ago that was the last chance. So you're past the point of no return. So you have to live with me, and I have to live with you, for better or for worse, for the rest of the term. Which, don't worry about it. We're actually over the hump now. We're more than halfway across the semester. But if you think that it would be better for you to be able to just directly engage with the PowerPoint slide and then just hit the recording and then listen to me, as opposed to be distracted by me, the video that you're watching, presumably. I mean, I hope you're watching this video. I don't know. Maybe I'm just talking to myself here, but or conversely, maybe it's helpful to have the video feed in addition to the audio. I don't know, all right? Maybe some of you could do without the video. It doesn't matter, right? Just it's me sitting on the edge of this desk looking like a schmuck wearing this old security jacket that I got. This was, by the way, this was my uniform. Not that any of you really care. And no, I don't have picked up a side gig at G4S Security, and I'm doing this simultaneously, and I'm in the office. Well, you can see this is not a security office that I'm in. This is my dad's home office. But I don't know how important the video feed is for you. So if you think that, I guess I prefer some kind of response either way. Right? I mean, unless you're completely ambivalent about all these things, you just don't care. Then I would say, okay, well then just don't say anything. We can just leave it to my good discretion. But understand, I may decide that it may actually be more pragmatic and expedient and in the collective interest of the class to go ahead and just give you guys access to one of my old online Moodle websites. Just give you access to the Moodle course page and then say, yeah, there, have at. All the stuff's already there. And I'm not proposing this because I'm sure some of you probably have the sneaking suspicion that, oh, well, the reason he's proposing this is because he wants to get out of having to record YouTube videos. That's not it at all. I don't mind doing this. It gets less onerous. It's less and less of a hassle, and it's less and less annoying the more I do it. It's like driving up to Calumet or driving back down here. The more you do it, the more you acclimate yourself to it, and the less onerous it becomes. But that's my proposal. And again, the reason I'm doing this, the reason I'm saying this, the reason I'm taking time out of the lectures is because I want to do things in accordance with the will of the people, the will of the class. And if you do not will that, if you do not wish that, then I don't want to be imposing this upon you if you think that YouTube videos are not very conducive to your understanding of the materials. That you would rather just look at a PowerPoint slide and listen to what I'm saying. Listen to what I'm saying, because that might be easier for you. I don't know. All right, I have no idea. Right. So if you have strong sentiments one way or the other on that, let me know. Reach out to me. You guys know what my email is. But that's the proposition. Okay. So
And the reason I'm saying this is because it may be difficult to follow where I'm at precisely with respect to the slides, because I'm not getting up and walking over there and showing you guys the slides, because I look like an idiot when I do that, and I don't really think it's necessary. All right, so I've advanced the slide, though. Okay, I've advanced the slide. Now I'm on the slide that says ancient Persia, and then it says the first bullet point says Cyrus incorporates Asia Minor and Ionia into Persia. And after Babylonian defeat, Cyrus. Okay, so yeah, the four corners of the world. All right, so let's talk about the end of Cyrus, the demise of Cyrus, if you will. This will be the end point for this lecture, because the next lecture I'm going to start talking about probably Cambyses, who was a real character, and then we're going to talk about Darius, and then we're probably going to talk about the Greeks. So moving right along now. So Cyrus decides that being the king of the four corners of the world wasn't enough for him, that he had to aspire to conquer more lands and more people. Not because he wanted to subjugate and enslave or just exterminate them. Not that wasn't what he was doing. But he just thought to himself, well, look, I've gotten this far. Okay, I've conquered the Neo-Assyrian Empire. I've conquered the Neo-Babylonian Empire. I've repatriated and restored the Jews back to their ancient territory, their ancient homelands. Right? I defeated Croesus. I defeated the Lydians. Now they're subject peoples of the Persians. I defeated the Chaldeans. I mean, everybody that I know, everybody that I've heard of, everybody that we've ever heard of has been defeated by us. There's in the words of Russell Crowe in the movie Gladiator, there's no one left to fight, sire. Right? Well, there's always someone left to fight, Maximus. But as far as Cyrus is concerned, well, there's virtually nobody left to fight. But of course, if you look long enough and hard enough, you can always find somebody else out there. And so he does find somebody else, but he has to make a concerted effort to really find somebody, okay? Because he's defeated all the people that really matter the most. He's defeated the kingdoms that were most significant to the lives of the people that were living in Persia at that time. And he also defeated everybody that could possibly be a manifest future existential threat to his rule. So at this point, he's not defeating other peoples because he's concerned that they may eventually ascend to a position of geopolitical or military prominence whereby they can manifest a threat to his rule. He's not going out there and doing this for the national security interests of Persia at this point. He's just doing it for greater glory. He's going out there just for glory, to acquire greater glory, greater prominence, to achieve even greater wealth, and people are going to respect him even more. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? I mean, that seems to be, begs the question, well, don't you already have enough of those things? Enough glory, enough power, enough wealth, etc. Do you really need to go out there and begin unilaterally and without provocation going out there and invading other countries that have never offended against the Persians or constituted a threat or some imposition to the interests of the Persians? Well, then you're doing what Croesus did to you, okay? And I think that this is the allegory here, right? If you look at this in terms of morality tale, right? You could say that Croesus improved upon his defects. He became a better man, all right? He became more compassionate. He became wiser. He became more selfless than he was before. And he lived to essentially be able to say that, you know what, I retrospectively earned the reprieve that Cyrus granted me, right? I think it was Hemingway that said, the definition of nobility is not achieving superiority to one's fellow man, but achieving superiority to one's former self. And I think that that's what certainly you could say about Croesus, but you could not say that about Cyrus, unfortunately. And the story, the way the story is set up, the way the narrative structure of this morality tale is articulated in the pages of Herodotus, is to suggest, anyways, that Cyrus really did not learn from the mistakes of others around him. Okay, maybe because he was too arrogant, maybe he was too self-conceited, maybe he became enamored with his own infallibility because he was conquering so many people. By the end of it, he figured, well, I can do no wrong, so I might as well go out there and conquer people who haven't assaulted against the Persians. I might as well just go conquer, anybody, just because I can, right? Well, then you're not saying that I'm going out there because I'm doing this for just reasons. I'm doing this for rational reasons. I'm doing this because you, the Babylonians, may very well get your act together sometime in the future and constitute an existential threat to the Persians, and so therefore I'm going to preemptively go out there and extinguish your capacity to become a threat to me in the future. Well, that makes sense. That there's a rationale to that. You could say there's justice to that, right? Or you're liberating people that are captives, right? That are being treated like slaves. you're doing that. Well, that's equitable. That's humane. That's a humanitarian motivation. You could say that there's justice in that, right? But it just goes say, I'm going to go invade these people that I practically nobody's never heard of them, right? Or very few people have really ever heard of them. They're these Scythians up there. They're not bothering anybody. They're up there in Kyrgyzstan or not Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, okay, and Kyrgyzstan, beautiful country up by Mongolia, some of the far eastern Soviet republics, where they used to test their space equipment out there and nuclear weapons because nobody really lived out there. Nobody really still does live out there. The people that are do are they're very tough people. They can have nuclear weapons tested on them and they still survive that. No, these people that were living up there in Scythia were not a threat to anybody, and there wasn't really anything worth conquering in Scythia. It was just open. It was the steppes, is what they refer to it as. STEPPES, and that's a type of it's an ecological biosphere, or not a biosphere, but an ecological zone. It's kind of like Russia, right? It's I guess Nebraska would be the better example. Western Nebraska. It's just open prairie, and then you've got just kind of badlands like South Dakota, certain areas of South Dakota, but there's not much there. In fact, there's so little there that the people who were living in Scythia were not agrarian populations. They hadn't advanced that stage of civilization. They were just they weren't hunter gatherers. They were nomadic pastoralists. They were riding around on horses. They were equestrians. And it's said Herodotus. One of the things that he does, in addition to giving this historical narrative, is he gives sort of an anthropological account of these people. He talks about their culture and their traditions and their practice and their beliefs and their religion, etc. And he says, so he kind of digresses into this discussion, this anthropological discussion here, as he's getting into the invasion of Scythia. And he says about the Scythians that one of the things that the Scythians would do is they would sit around a fire. They'd have like a campfire, right? And they'd sit around the campfire and they'd throw what Herodotus referred to as this magic fruit. Okay, they had this special magical fruit which had astonishing physiological properties to it. They'd throw this magical fruit into the fire. Okay, they throw this strange fruit into the fire, and then the smoke that was produced by this magic fruit, as it was combusting in the fire, the smoke would rise up, and the Scythians would breathe in. They would inhale the smoke. Right? They take deep breaths. And they would become, in the words of Herodotus, they would become drunk by inhaling the smoke of this magical fruit that these Scythians were throwing into the fire. What was Herodotus talking about? Right? Was Herodotus smoking something himself when he wrote this? Well, no. Well, that could be a couple of things that they were throwing in there. Right? It could be a few things. Right? They could be throwing meth in there. I don't think they had meth because that requires household cleaners to manufacture meth and artificial chemicals and things. It wasn't. I don't think they were smoking meth. Well, maybe that's why the Scythians didn't fight very well, because they were a bunch of meth heads. That would make explanation. That would give a good accounting as to why. But no, they weren't throwing meth in there, and they weren't throwing crack cocaine in there, because that's artificially created as well. That's not something that naturally you can't. There's not crack cocaine growing off some tree over there in Scythia. No, they're throwing marijuana in there. Okay, they're throwing marijuana, and they were getting quote unquote drunk, intoxicated by. I mean. You could just use your imagination if you've never experienced it personally firsthand, all right? And that's what the Scythians would do. And then Herodotus says, well, what the Persians would do is, instead of throwing magical fruit in the fire and then inhaling the fumes, the smoke they would produce, and getting drunk off that, the Persians would drink wine. And the Persians, one of the things that the Persians did when they would drink wine is they would mix wine with philosophical discourse. And so the tradition that the Persians had, and this is in contrast to the tradition that the people of Scythia had, was that the Persians would all get around. They would sit around maybe not the campfire, but they'd sit around the kitchen table or the living room, the family room, right? And they would discuss some philosophical issue. The meaning of life, the nature of right and wrong, evil, good and evil, etc. They discussed that while they were sober, okay? And they discussed these philosophical issues while they were sober. And then they start throwing back the bottle, right? They get a little drunk, they get a little tuned up, they start having their wine. And then they revisit the topic, okay? They engage in their philosophical discourse again while drunk, okay? And discuss the implications of good and evil and the reason as to why we're all here, or whatever else they were discussing. Right? And then they would sober up, okay, and then they'd finally reconvene and have one more discussion while they were sober, And so they would reach whatever conclusions they were able to reach in these different physiological states that they were in, and they would try to reason while sober and then reason while drunk, because some people become more philosophical while they're drunk. Some people become more illuminated while they're drunk, right? Some people become more loquacious. I mean, obviously, a lot of people become complete and utter douchebags when they're drunk, but the thinking was that, well, the drinking is going to modify the way in which you approach solving problems, the way in which you approach just conceptualizing things in general. And so therefore, you will look at this from a different angle, right? It's like certain authors and artists would paint a landscape or something where they're under the influence of, I don't know, opium or whatever, right? They would use drugs. They would be uh, some physiological alteration, right? They would create things because they'd be more creative, right? And that's the idea, is that we're drunk, we're more creative potentially. We could think of things that we wouldn't otherwise contemplate when we're drunk, and then we come back and we reevaluate whether or not that stuff made any sense, or were we just being a bunch of coherent idiotic drunks when we were talking about these things. And that's the way that the Persians would essentially adjudicate matters of great significance and philosophical importance. Okay, now one of the other reasons why Herodotus is talking about all this is because the Scythians didn't know anything about alcohol. They were not an agrarian people. To be able to produce alcohol, you have to have the prerequisite of being an agrarian people, because you guys know that alcohol is just fermented grapes or wheat or barley or grain or whatever it is, potatoes for vodka. But you have to cultivate that particular thing, right? You can cultivate, harvest that crop, whatever that thing is that you're using as the incipient ingredient in the alcohol. You got to be able to harvest that first. So the Scythians weren't agrarians, right? And therefore they weren't cultivating, they weren't harvesting any crops. They were just riding around on horses and apparently smoking a lot of weed. And they didn't know anything about alcohol. Now this is important because this actually goes to this makes the story more interesting. So it's said that when Cyrus discovered that these Scythians were up there, he initially proposed to the queen of the Scythians. The Massagate was the name of the tribe up there. You don't need to know this, but the name of the tribe was the Massagate. And the queen's name was Tomyris, okay? And Tomyris was allegedly very beautiful, very vivacious queen, as they all tend to be in these stories, like Cleopatra. Very shrewd, right? Very shrewd, very savvy, very Machiavellian in her thinking, but also very beautiful. And Cyrus gravitated towards this queen naturally, because he said, you would be a worthy queen for such a great and edifying conqueror such as myself, this great philosophical military genius that I am. And Queen Tomyris rebuffed his advances. She said, "No, I'm not interested in marrying you, because I know what you're going to do. Or you have an ulterior motive." Because she was shrewd, she was clever, she understood the raison d'etre, the reasoning behind the doing of the thing. The marriage proposition was merely a facade. Okay, it was a disingenuous attempt to deceive the Massagate, the Scythians, right, into making this marriage contract, which would then allow Cyrus, through the laws of primogeniture and male patrilineal inheritance, allow him to incorporate the kingdom of the Scythians under the auspices of Persian rule. So therefore he could acquire Scythia, this ancestral homeland of these proud marijuana smoking people that were riding around horses. He could incorporate that land into his kingdom, into his domain, without shedding any blood, without having to fight any battles or initiate any warfare. Pretty shrewd, pretty clever. But Tomyris, the queen, was even more clever than he, okay? Because she anticipated that was the real rationale behind his marriage proposition. It wasn't just that she was very attractive. It wasn't just that she was very clever. It wasn't just that she was very powerful, like, again, Cleopatra, right? I don't know. It was what he really wanted to get at was he wanted to acquire her territory without having to fight for it. And so she says to him, Cyrus, you have attempted to perpetrate a deception against me and my Scythian proud horse-riding peoples. You wanted to acquire this territory without actually having to work for it. And Cyrus says, well, yes, okay, fine, fair enough, but so what? Because either I will get it through marriage or I will get it through force. And Queen Tomyris of the Scythians says, okay, well, come and try. You're welcome to try. And it's also said by Herodotus that this queen was a very noble queen. She was a very virtuous queen. She was very fair and impartial and reasonable queen. She was so reasonable and she was so fair and so equitable in her conception of how to comport herself in relation to her enemy that she said, Cyrus, I know you are now going to invade me. You and the rest of the Persians are going to invade me because you are acquisitive and you're desirous of acquiring this territory that we have, which by all right is not yours because we're not a threat to you. We've never done any grievances towards you Persians. You have no historical grievance against us, and we're not enslaving people, and there's no justice in your cause. But leaving all that aside, right? Even though you're invading us unilaterally, right, without any just cause, because I'm so fair, right, I the queen, am going to allow you a battle on fair terms on ground of your choosing, on ground that is even, right, where there's no forests or no area where you can conceal troops, or we the Scythians can conceal troops, so we can see each other, we can fight each other as we see each other, right? We can engage our enemy and fight a very fair battle. And Cyrus says, well, let me think about that. Okay, so there's this river that divides the area of Scythia from the farthest reaches, the farthest expanse of the Persian Empire. The river Jaxtis. You don't have to know this, right? But that's the name of the river. And this river is a problem. Okay, and this I should have said this with respects to what the queen was offering. She says, "I will allow you, Cyrus, to cross this river and to fight us on our own territory." Right? Because crossing a river while attempting to fight the enemy simultaneously is a very, very difficult proposition, because the enemy can shoot you with arrows and they can attack you, and your guys are being drowned by the river, and you got to build these bridges to get across the river, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a big river. It's like the Mississippi. And that was the offer. We'll allow you to take your time, cross this river, come over here, and then fight us as equals on even ground, a ground of our mutual, where we mutual acquiesce to the ground. And instead of doing that, what Cyrus does is he devises this plan whereby he is going to leave his camp virtually unguarded. He rebuffs the queen's offer. He says, "No, I'm not interested in that. No, let me sit around. Let me talk to my nobles. We'll figure out a different way. I'll come back with you. I'll come back to you with a different proposition." And instead, what Cyrus does is he comes up with this on his own, because he can be very clever, but he can also be very devious when he wants to be. He thinks to himself, how can I defeat those Scythians? They smoke a lot of weed, they ride a lot of horses, they seem pretty tough. I don't know. I go up against those guys. He thinks to himself, I'm going to leave my camp virtually unguarded. Okay, virtually unguarded, just a few guys surrounding my camp, right? And I'm going to make it seem as though me and the rest of my army have left. We've just left, okay, because we got tired of going to war with the Scythians. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to leave large containers of wine sitting around the camp, okay, just large, whatever, vases and such, full of wine. And he does this, and the Scythians see that they don't have many guards guarding the camp, so they attack. They say, the time is opportune. Look, the gods favor us. It looks like the bulk of the Persian forces have left. And they left their camp on guard, and there's going to be treasure up there, and there's all kinds of other good stuff. We can get up there and loot that camp. And so they do. And this is very stupid on Cyrus's part. You may say, well, what Cyrus is doing? He's giving away all his booze. It's free drinks up there. But remember, the Scythians are not agrarian peoples. They don't know how to cultivate crops, and therefore they don't know how to ferment crops, and therefore they don't know anything about drinking. And what do we know about people who never drank before? Well, I don't know what that's like, because it's been so long since I was in that condition. But I first drank when I was 16 years old. Or I don't know. It's been a while, right? But what do you know, either from personal firsthand experience or anecdotally through others, right? What do you know about people who don't drink very often? They have a very low physiological threshold and tolerance for booze. Okay, it's like my girlfriend, right? I give her like one shot of vodka and she's on the floor. Okay, which is all the more paradoxical because she herself is actually from Russia, right? But you know these people, okay? Because they've never drank before, they're very petite, or their physiology is such that they just don't have a tolerance for this stuff. Well, the Scythians didn't have a tolerance for the booze, okay? Because they never drank it before. It wasn't part of their tradition, wasn't part of their heritage, wasn't part of their culture, and none of them have had this before. And so you know what's going to happen, right? You can envision what's going to happen, right? You know how this is going to end, right? Scythians come over, they raid the camp, they killed a few guards that Cyrus had posted around, and they find this interesting liquid substance in these vases sitting around the Persian camp. So this smells kind of, it smells like turpentine. I don't know what this shit is, right? Let's give it a try, though, right? We're all high. We're smoking a lot of weed. We're sitting around the fire, throwing the magic fruit in there, getting high. Let's try some of this. Maybe this is good. And so the Scythians, they start trying this. They're experimenting, right? And they experiment with this new substance, and they realize this is pretty good. I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling happy. Yeah, I'm having a nice time. This is pretty euphoric, right? Get a little buzz going, but they don't realize that yeah, it's good to drink a little. It's bad to drink a lot. Okay, and they don't have any self-control because they don't realize just how bad this stuff can be because they've never been hungover before. They keep drinking and they get rip-roaringly drunk. They get catastrophically falling down, stupid drunk. And what happens? The next day they're all massively hungover, right? They're just all laying around. They got massive headaches. The sun is in their eyes. They would just want to lay around and go back to sleep. They feel sick, right? They can't eat anything. And that's when Cyrus initiates his attack. He initiates his attack after he's deceived them into coming into he laid the trap, okay? This is entrapment, essentially. Or you could say this is entrapment, right? He entraps them, right? Or he deceives them into coming into the camp, and he knows full well they're going to drink that wine. And he reasonably expects that when they drink that wine, they're going to become sufficiently intoxicated so as to be completely ineffectual at fighting him the next day. Well, I would say you could come down on two ways on this. Obviously, you could say, well, this is just more categorical evidence that Cyrus is a very, very shrewd, very clever, brilliant military strategist. I mean, look at this. He anticipated what the Scythians were going to do based on their anthropological predisposition, their aversion for intoxicants, and he knew that this was going to be very intoxicating for them. He knew it was going to be very debilitating for them the next day. What a clever mastermind he is. Look, he pulled all the strings in all the right ways, and he set this up, and he achieved victory. Well, what ends up happening, though, is that during the course of the battle, Cyrus actually ends up dying. Okay, now it's said that when Cyrus dies in this battle, again, this is an apocryphal story. It's not a lot of truth and a lot of accuracy to it. So they fight. I should be very clear about this. The first battle, the Scythians lose because they're drunk and they're hungover, and they're not able to physically fight very well because they're so debilitated from being drunk the night before. The next battle, Cyrus loses. Okay. Cyrus loses the next battle, and that was the more significant battle. And Cyrus dies in the course of this battle. Okay, he's killed. And it's said that when the queen Tomyris discovers the body of Cyrus laying on the field, she has his head cut off. Okay, as a sign of contempt for the invader. As a sign of contempt for somebody who, again, unilaterally, without provocation, invaded her land, didn't have justice, didn't have a good cause, right? Just did that just for the hell of it, right? Just because he could, okay? And this is Herodotus's point here is to say that those who live by the sword will die by the sword, right? It's the quote from the Bible, right? Essentially, is that if you go out there and if you offend against people who have not offended against you, right? If you go out there and you attack people who don't represent a threat to you, you just go out there and do it merely because you can. Right. The only argument you would have in that is saying that might makes right. I'm doing this because I can, not because I should, not because the gods demand it, not because you're a threat to me, not because you're doing anything bad, but merely because I can. And I think the other point is that when you look at the result, when you look at this and you say to yourself, well, Cyrus ends up dying, and he's defeated in the course of this battle, right? It's the worst case scenario for him, right? And what has Cyrus done up until now? Cyrus has been victorious up until now. He's been nearly undefeated. I can't say that he's been undefeated because we don't know if he was ever defeated, but if he was ever defeated, it wasn't reported by Herodotus. So we can say that up until the invasion of the Scythians, Cyrus was essentially, as far as we're concerned, undefeated. And then he invades these people, and even though he uses these clever ploys, these machinations, these deceptions, these invidious entrapments, he's still defeated despite all of that, right? Despite the fact that if you look at this rationally, well, the Scythians should have been the ones who were defeated, right? In fact, initially they were defeated, right? But this is the way, this is a rather circuitous way of Herodotus making the point that there's a morality tale here, right? It's to say, beware the pride before the fall, okay? And again, that's another quote from the good book, right? Don't go out there and be so arrogant and be so self-conceited and so solipsistic that you believe that you are infallible because you've conquered so many people, right? And because you believe that justice is on your side, because you believe that what you're doing is righteous, and therefore that gives you a moral precedent to go out there and attack anybody, even unilaterally, right? Even without, because they didn't defend against you, just because you can, right? That's not what Herodotus wants people to believe. He wants people to believe, therefore, based on what happened to Cyrus, that even a good man can be corrupted by pride and arrogance and this attitude of self-aggrandizement, whereby you think yourself to be so high and mighty and lofty, the king of the four corners of the world, that you actually really do want to be the king of all the world. Okay, and again, that's the idea: is that power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Okay, where does it end? At what point do you say that, you know what, I've conquered enough peoples, I've acquired enough land in my new empire, I'm satisfied with what I've achieved? At what point does it end? Okay, and I think for people like Cyrus, it never ends, right? It never ends. It just keeps on going. You acquire more glory, more prestige, more power, and that only encourages you to be more voracious, more acquisitive in your appetite for even more power, to conquer even more lands, even less necessary and essential to your security and stability than the lands that you conquered before them. And I think it's a never-ending cycle that just recapitulates itself again and again and again. And it's incessant. Okay, I think that's the point that we can assimilate ourselves to with respects to what Herodotus would like for us to think and what he wants us to believe about all this. Now, I think that's about all I'm going to say today, because I'm getting tired of talking, and we've covered a lot right now. Next time, so this video is meant to be watched in conjunction with Monday, our Monday's class. This is Monday's class. I will put the Wednesday video out sometime, probably before, I would think probably Sunday, actually. I don't care when you guys get around to watching this stuff, honestly. I mean, I'm going to be straight up and honest with you, right? I don't care when you get around to watching it, right? And notice I didn't say if, okay? I want you to watch this eventually. I want you to watch this, right? Hopefully you're watching it. Hopefully you're still with me. I don't know. This lecture was slightly boring in certain parts, but you need to watch this, okay? Now, what you could conceivably do, if you really, I mean, this is one of the advantages of having a YouTube lecture series, right? Is that you watch this on your own time. Now, what that means is what you could conceivably do is you could just, I wouldn't recommend doing this. I mean, I think this would be very imprudent and inadvisable. What you could conceivably do is you could say, well, you know what? I don't like doing things when they should be done. I like to procrastinate. I like to wait. I am a procrastinator par excellence. Okay, I used to procrastinate all the time. Sometimes I still do, and I realize I can commiserate with procrastinators because I understand them, because I am one of them. I realize that some people are better at that, right? They're better at working at a deadline when the pressure is on, and you're really forced to work in a more concerted measure to get whatever done. But what I would say is this: if you really want to, I don't think this would be, well, I'm not going to recommend this, but I guess you could do this. And one of the reasons I'm saying this is because I don't want anybody to feel disenfranchised or alienated from this course because you're just watching me talk on YouTube now, and I'm not physically there in person. But as I said before, in the very beginning of this video, if you don't know the many reasons as to why I think this is actually advantageous for you as well as for me, go back and listen to the beginning, because I think I made some pretty good points back there. But if you're still not sold, think about this, right? You could conceivably, again, I'm not recommending this, right? But what you could do is you could just wait until the exam comes out, right? Wait until I publish the exam and disseminate that exam to all of you guys via email. You look at the questions, and then you ask yourself, well, I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to selectively watch the parts of the videos that actually correspond with the questions, right? In a way that actually elucidates the topic that he's asking about, right? And therefore, I can skip through all the superfluous stuff, all the the various commentary and interjections and tangential points that Jeff goes off on and meanders around. I can just focus on what really matters, and therefore I can consolidate and save myself a lot of time and trouble in the end. Now, I'm not saying you can't do that. I mean, you can try to do that. I mean, I think it would be. I wouldn't recommend doing that. Okay, I think you should probably just listen to this and do it the old-fashioned way. Right? Listen to however long this takes, and I promise I'm going to try to keep these videos under 2 hours, well under 2 hours, probably an hour and 45 minutes, which I'm coming up to right now. So I'm going to cut this off here in about a minute. But if that's what you want to do, fine. Okay, if you can do that, if you can pull that off with alacrity and with success, then you know what, more power to you. Okay, I personally wouldn't recommend doing that. I personally probably could do that. I probably would be able to do that, but I'm not recommending it to you guys because I think in some ways you'd be doing yourself a disservice because you would miss out on some stuff, right? But you could do it. Okay, remember, Right, this is very important. If you would prefer that I grant you guys access to my Moodle website, and then you can just listen to the recordings that are embedded in the PowerPoint slides, maybe that's more congenial to your learning interests. I don't know. Okay, I've studied pedagogy for a while. It depends on whether you're a visual learner. It depends on how important it is for you to actually see me sitting here on this desk or behind the desk or wherever. Right. I don't know how integral that is to the learning process. Maybe it doesn't matter at all. All right. Maybe some of you guys actually do need the video because it's more interactive and immersive. I don't know. Okay. All right. So tell me. All right. Communicate to me. Let me know how you feel about this proposition. Right. Because we could go forward in one of two ways. Either I can keep doing these YouTube videos. I'll publish them on the weekend. Right. And then you got it for the next week and just, watch them at your leisure, whenever the hell you got time for it. Or I could say, all right, I'm going to give you all you guys access to my previous online course that I created for the Moodle version of this class. Log on there and then view the PowerPoint slides and then click on the little audio button that's going to be embedded in there, the little audio icon, and you can listen to my voice. You won't be able to see me, but you'll be able to hear me. And then you can listen to me in conjunction with that particular slide. So you can hear me talking about a slide. Maybe that's more helpful because maybe that reinforces the information in a way that's more comprehensive. Okay, but either way, you decide. I will defer to whatever the majority decides. Okay, I am your servant. I am your agent. I am the implementer of your policies, that which you, in your own subjective interest, decide is what's best for you. All right, that's it. Stay safe. Be well. Wear your mask, and I will hope to physically see you guys in about 2 weeks from today. Okay. Or maybe you guys will come back to me and say, you know what, I think this YouTube thing is working out actually, because I think I might have a higher chance of success on the test, just like you said, Jeff. And I'd rather not have to get up at 8 a.m. in the morning to be there at 9. I don't know. All right, it's up to you guys. It's your class. It's your money. I'm your servant. I'm your employee. You let me know. Until next time, take care. Be well. Be safe. Bye.